Hey everyone, it's Nightharrow here, and today we're going to talk about the two-handed weapon skill line. As promised in a previous video, we're circling back around to go through each one of the skill lines, so let's go ahead and talk about it. First up here, we have the ultimate. We've got Berserking Strike, and I'm going to be checking my notes a little bit because some of these are a little bit more obscure. I don't talk about them a whole lot, so I'll be looking down a little bit more than usual. So Berserking Strike morphs into Onslaught and to Berserking Rage. Both of these are basically PvP uses for this ability. I don't PvP nearly as much. Basically here though, you have a way of getting a bunch of resistance. So if you have someone who's just crazy high in resistance and you can't quite get it down, even though you're using, they're just super tanky, that would be the only reason to kind of use this skill. The first hit ignores all the resistance, and then it gives you penetration, which is the opposite of resistance, equal to that amount for a period of time. I think 5 to 8 seconds, depending on the morph. And the other thing is that one morph, Berserking Rage, lets you not be CC'd, so you can kind of, I guess, finish the fight. But that would be the main use for this. You would never really use this in PvE. After that, we have Uppercut. This has a couple of interesting morphs here. So Dizzying Swing is going to be our PvP morph, although again, I think there are probably better things for this. It sets the target off balance. If they're already off balance, it can stun them for a couple of seconds. I think there are easier ways to set off balance. There are easy ways to stun a target or to slow them, which is also an effect if they can't be stunned. Not horrible, but I think that there might be, easier, better ways to do that. And a lot of times, if you're killing kind of newer people or less experienced people, there's a lot easier ways to do it probably. If it's a more experienced person, they will have an immovability potion so that they can't be stunned and snared and all that kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind. Wrecking Blow. This is the PvE morph. What this does, in addition to doing damage, it also grants Empower for a number of seconds. I think it says 3 here. I think it goes up to 5, but 3 might be correct. And it also gives Major Berserk. I'll pop it up on the screen here. I thought it was 5, but maybe it's 3. Maybe I was just remembering incorrectly. Empower, what that does is it increases the damage of your heavy attacks by 70%. This is a crucial thing for a heavy attack build, like a heavy attack Sorg, or just any heavy attack build. You can do it on any class that's using a lightning staff. I have tried this for doing a heavy attack build. You can get some decent damage. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. The lightning staff is so much easier to use because you can use it at range. But the other main thing is that some of your best heavy attack builds and sets, you get plus damage. And the way it works is, like, a lot of them will say your heavy attacks do, let's just make up a number, 1,000 extra damage. Well, the way it works for the lightning staff is that you actually hit like 3 or 4 times, I don't remember exactly, but you hit multiple times on a target, and it adds that damage each time. So if it does 1,000 damage, but you hit the target 4 times, that set increases your damage with a lightning staff 4 times. If you do pretty much any other weapon, you don't get that, right? So if you're using an Inferno Staff, you charge it up, you throw it once. Ice Staff, same thing, right? Resto Staff is one of the few situations where it actually does tick up a few times, but with a two-handed weapon, you charge it up and then you do 1 hit, right? So that's why heavy attacks don't work on most classes, and they really are pretty much just for lightning staffs. So kind of unfortunate there, but you can use this as a spammable, as a stamina spammable. I actually have this, or will be having this, I'm not sure if it's out yet, on my DK, my stamina DK as an option. So while I do recommend Stone Giant, you could use this. And the Major Berserk actually on some classes, it's intermittent. I'm not sure if they intend this, but some classes, this is actually how you can get the highest parse, because that extra 10% damage for Major Berserk is pretty huge. So just having that buff, being able to use it consistently as your spammable, it increases, even though that 1 hit from the spammable might not be as strong as some of your other ones, the fact that it gives the extra 10% damage to everything you're doing is significant enough to kind of put you over the edge and make it kind of the best to use. So Wrecking Blow is a great spammable, and so in all my builds, whenever I'm saying, hey, you could put in any spammable here or something like that, Wrecking Blow is absolutely one you could put in that position. After that, we have Critical Charge, and the 2 morphs of this are Stampede and Critical Rush. So Stampede is the PvE morph. This is the primary one. So this, go ahead whenever you cast this, it goes ahead and does a critical hit every single time. So that's really nice. So you got to keep that in mind. It does do more damage than it might at first seem, because that initial hit is going to be a guaranteed critical. The other thing, and probably the most important thing about this is the one skill on the bar. Each class, each weapon skill class, and I appreciate Lenny for pointing this out to me. I don't remember if I knew this at one point and forgot or what, but one skill from every weapon skill class will continue to proc your enchants on that bar when you're on a different bar. So what I mean by that is that if you use Stampede and you use it on your back bar, then you switch to your front bar and you're on your front bar for a very long time, as long as Stampede is up, it will continue to proc whatever your weapon enchant is. And typically that is a weapon or spell power enchantment on that item with an infused item. And so that will maximize your DPS. You don't want that falling off. So you need to use Stampede, even if there might be a better dot and you only have room for one, you need to use the weapon skill to keep that enchant procced all the time. That's why you almost always see a weapon skill on all back bar builds, right? With the infused enchant, you will always see, Wall of Elements does it for that, and Blade Cloak does it for the dual wield, and so on and so forth. But for us on the two-handed, Stampede is the way to go. Stampede also works really well as a gap closer. So if you're a melee-focused build, which oftentimes you will be if you're running this skill, this is how you close the distance so you can get in with all of your other melee abilities. It is fairly expensive, so keep that in mind. You probably don't want to be spamming this all the time, and it's why you can't use it as a spam where you'll run out of stam. But this is a great skill to close that distance and help you get into melee and get more damage on the target. The other morph of this, Critical Rush, the difference in this is it does more damage based on how far you travel to the target. Now this could be very useful, I think, for PvP. Obviously the ground dot doesn't really help because PvP you're going to be moving out of it, but it's a gap closer and then it does more damage so you can close the distance and get a nice big initial burst hit. That's the main reason for this. How great it is, you'd have to ask someone who PvPs more than me, but that seems like the purpose of this skill. After that we have Cleave, and the PvE morph of this is going to be Carve. Carve is not the best dot. It does apply in a cone in front of you, so you can apply it to multiple targets, but it doesn't hit the hardest. What is really nice about Carve, though, is each time you recast it, as long as it doesn't drop off, it increases the duration by 10 seconds. So it goes from 12 seconds to 22 to 32 seconds. So this means that you can be on your front bar using your spam bolt more often. So basically, if you think of a 20-second dot, every 3 casts of that, you would only have to cast this twice. So you save a GCDs that you could use for more spamble attacks and also being on your front bar, and that's the main benefit. So any kind of spamble focused build, this is going to work really well on, because it gives you that extra duration so you can make sure you stay on your front bar and use that spammable more often. So not all spambles are created equal, some hit harder than others, basically. It also provides you with a little bit of a shield. It's not amazing, but it's not bad either. And there are actually situations where you can try to shield up or use this as your shield, and it does just enough to keep you from dying with other effects and everything. And so it's it's something you can spam to kind of give yourself a little bit of a shield if you don't otherwise have one slotted. The other morph of this Brawler actually does the same thing, but its shield scales up based on how many targets you hit. It's, I believe, 50% per target, up to 300%. So if you're in an AoE fight or soloing or something and you want to be more of a tanky build, or if you're in PvP and you want a big shield, you could use Brawler instead. I wouldn't recommend it for PvE. Generally, there are other things you want to do instead, because you do lose some damage on this because you don't get that extra long duration, and the initial timer isn't that long, all things considered. After that, we have Reverse Slash. First morph here is actually just called Reverse Slice. Not incredibly creative on that one, I guess. But this is basically used as an execute, and it can do up to 300% more damage to targets under 50% health. This has off and on been a really good execute ability to have. And I'm sorry, Reverse Slash, this has an AoE component to it, and so it'll also hit nearby enemies. If you are in certain situations like the triplets, for example, that might be a place where maybe this would make sense for you, right? Your execute is very important. You get through it quickly. You have 3 targets, and I'm sorry, the triplets is from veteran Halls of Fabrication. You want to kill them all at the same time. It's one of the rare fights that AoEs are actually pretty important. You might want to use something like this. It's a very niche skill. It's not something you would necessarily do, but you can do some weird things and it might actually be okay. Executioner is the other morph, and this scales up, and instead of hitting other targets around the first target, it actually scales up to 400% more damage. Now, the reason that you don't see this on more builds is because, Execute is only part of the, only part of the fight, right? And so even though it might be great in execute, if it's not great for the rest of the fight, it cannot be the best skill to use. So off and on, executioner has been something that we have used. It is viable. Just realize that. Is it the best thing to use? Oftentimes right now, not. I bet there's a build or two though that absolutely this would be. Maybe even more. Maybe it's very close or almost equal to some other things. It can just be up to you. But the other thing that is nice about an execute is that kind of, especially one like this, is that what happens is you have less skills on your bar, and then when you get to execute, you just use this as your main spammable. And sometimes you can even let a lot of your dots fall off and just use the spammable because it does so much damage. And that's kind of how you do it. It simplifies execute a little bit. The problem with that is while that can be nice for execute, you're also complicating your rotation as opposed to just doing the same thing the entire time. Now you're having to switch partway through. As someone who has long played a Nightblade like myself, that has an execute spammable, I would say it's harder. And so it's usually better not to use this, even if maybe technically it could do more damage in certain situations, because it just makes the rotation that much harder. So anyways, it's a mixed bag is I guess my point, but don't think that it's useless. Absolutely not. That's not the case. And then after that we have momentum. This is primarily a PvP skill here, but you could use this in PvP. The main thing, so forward momentum, what it allows you to do is when you cast it, it grants you immunity to snares and immobilization effects for 4 seconds. It also grants you major brutality and major sorcery, which increases your weapon and spell damage by 20%. So if you're running around Overland and you don't want to use expensive potions, this might be a good skill to use. It lasts for 40 seconds, which is a long time. It also gives you minor endurance, which increases your stamina recovery. So that is pretty good if you're on a stamina build, because Overland and in dungeons, you can sometimes be lacking a little bit in those kind of things. In a dungeon, you might get that buff from a healer, but if you're solo Overland and you're not getting it from somewhere else, it might, it could be something you could do. You're kind of, min-maxing for Overland is kind of weird because, it's usually not that hard, so it's not really necessary, but it is something you could do, and some of the newer Overland stuff is actually fairly challenging, so maybe something you could use there. Rally is a little bit more, I would say, the PvP side of this. It does those same things for providing the weapon and spell power increased by 20%, but with major brutality, major sorcery, and it also provides the minor endurance, which increases your stamina recovery by 15%. It only lasts for 20 seconds. But the other thing about this is that at the end of that, it heals you, or rather whenever you recast it or it wears off, those both technically end it. It heals you for a set amount, and then 15% for each second that it's been left on, up to 300%. So this is something in PvP, you cast it before you go into a fight, and then you get kind of a heal in the middle of a fight, which is kind of nice. And it also gives you that weapon and spell damage, so you can use immovability potions and other things like that, so you can kind of min-max that way. But I think that is it for the skill line. We should probably go ahead and talk about some of these passives. So first up here is Forceful. Your light and heavy attacks deal damage to up to 3 nearby enemies for up to 100% of the damage inflicted on the primary target. Again, usually you don't need AoE. You can get that from other skills in other places. So that's why this isn't, anything too crazy to write home about. Heavy weapons grant you a bonus based on the weapon type equipped. Swords increases your weapon and spell damage by 25%. Axes increases your critical damage by 12%. Maces increases your armor penetration by almost 3,000. So the reason that you use different weapons in a given skill line similar to dual wield is because of these type bonuses. So the reason that we usually use swords in PvE is because we want to maximize our weapon and spell damage. The reason we don't use axes anymore, you could use axes in certain situations, but oftentimes if we're in a group setting in a trial, we don't need the extra critical damage. If you do need the extra critical damage, this could be a great way to get it. There are just often other ways to get to that cap or close to it, but it is an option. And if you're in a 4-man group or Overland, you could actually, optimize for this by using an axe. And it would be, pretty high up there. It's more important than the weapon and spell damage if you're not already at cap, although there are a lot of ways to probably get to cap already. And then maces, this is kind of the PvP option here. A lot of times people stack a lot of more resistances in PvE, and you want to be able to penetrate all the way down because that will increase your damage the most out of anything if you're not already at full penetration. So that's why you might see maces used more in PvP. And then after that we have Balanced Blade. It reduces the stamina cost of your two-hand abilities by 15%. you know, makes them cheaper. That's great. Better sustain. Nothing really else to say about it. And then after that, we have follow-up. When you complete a fully charged heavy attack, your damage done with a two-handed attack increases by 10% for 4 seconds. Again, you know, remember that we have, you know, sets that buff heavy attacks by so much that even though this helps make up for that gap, in my experience, heavy attacking with a two-handed weapon, because I tried this recently, not like this patch, but in the not too distant past, because I always want different builds, and to, you know, maybe I can show you guys something different and new that you might like, and I just found it wasn't quite as good. So anyways, but this does help a little bit. And then last here, Battle Rush increases your stamina recovery by 30% for 10 seconds after you kill a target. This is just kind of nice if you're overland or you're having sustain issues, period. It's just kind of a cool thing, nice to have, but nothing else really to say about it. But anyways, that's it for the two-handed skill line. If I missed anything or you had any comments, drop them down below, and we'll see you in the next one as we cover the next skill line. Talk to you later.